Hello, everyone, and welcome to RivianTrackr video. I am joined today by Jordan from Out of Spec. Jordan, how are you today?
Doing well, Jose. How are you?
Good, Jordan. Well, thanks for coming along and chatting with me here. Today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about. So you guys recently did a Out of Spec race to Vegas, and it was really cool. You guys had an EV9, a Rivian R1S, you had the Mercedes EQS, and a Tesla Model X. Sorry.
Yep.
And you did a really cool race to Vegas and back to Colorado, where you guys are located. And I watched all your videos, all 18 hours of it, and it was great, and I loved it. And I'm sure many people out there watched it as well, or at least 2x'd it. And but one thing that caught my eye, and you and I kind of talked a little bit about it. We texted back and forth and all that about it was Rivian's route planner and how it seems to prioritize Rivian Adventure Networks or Rivian Waypoints over other chargers in particular, and even at the expense of time and money and like just going out of the way and all that. So can you I just want to talk a little bit about that, and we'll kind of start with you and your experience with that, and talk a little bit about it because you and Andres, if I'm not mistaken, rode in the R1S, and I've heard nothing but great things from you about the Rivian R1S, but this was really the kind of the biggest issue you had, which was the route planner. So if you want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about that, tell us about that, and then we'll kind of have a discussion about that.
Yeah. So heading out to Vegas was I guess you could say the main race, our typical race to Vegas. So we put all four of the three-row capable electric family SUVs, and just left it up to the drivers to get to Vegas fastest. It's about 800 miles, and through the Rocky Mountains, so lots of elevation, intense heat, sometimes intense cold, but in this case, it was just a lot of heat, but also some cooler temperatures up in the high altitude zones, like 11,000 feet. So that was fun. It's just pitting vehicles against each other, also somewhat drivers trying to figure out who can optimize the best. I was very excited to be in the Rivian. I'm a huge fan of Rivian. I knew it'd be a comfortable ride, good, comfortable seats, heated and ventilated, good software. I'm such a software snob. So I just kind of wanted to make sure I wasn't in the EV9 and for that software experience. And that's a whole can of worms for other. I mean, we've done videos on that over and out of spec for sure, but yeah, the Rivian and the Tesla to me are kind of the best in terms of just getting somewhere and having good software experience and good driving experience. So I was fine with either of those. Of course, Andreas and I had done these trips together before, so it was a good team. I think we're competitive, so I think we had a good chance at giving the Rivian the best shot it could. On the way out there, we just kind of figured out how it would handle things. We were kind of doing our own manual, nerdy EV enthusiast route planning, but also seeing what the truck or the SUV was telling us to do. And there was a lot of agreement with what we thought we should go versus what it said we should get there with. And yeah, a good learning phase of what are the limitations of the software. For example, you can tell it the state of charge upon arrival that where you want to get somewhere and be okay arriving with somewhere in the route planning, but that's only the final destination. It seems to be aiming for 10% arrival on subsequent chargers in between, and it threw us off heading out there with a couple things. Once it was saying, we'd get to a charger with, 39, 40 something miles remaining. That's one nitpick I have, is that Rivian doesn't tell you the state of charge upon arrival. It only tells you in miles, which is kind of it's a rated based on the EPA
Yeah,
range, which is not
I
really
agree.
accurate anyways. So that's an issue. And so it said we get to this charger, and then suddenly it said you can't go to that charger. You need to turn around and go 20 or 30 miles back the other way from where we just came, which was the Rivian Adventure Network. And yeah, it was like, what? That makes no sense. Like, there's another DC fast charger close to our destination, on our side of it. So we would have, the issue was basically, I'm rambling at this point, but we would have gotten to that charging stop at 9%, and the
Mhm.
software was programmed to not let you arrive below 10 at a charging stop. So that was an issue. Getting to the Rivian Adventure Network, I was excited to try Rivian Adventure Network for the first, I guess, second time. I did go to the very first one that opened right when they opened, so that was really cool. But now, a couple years later, there's a lot more Adventure Network chargers out there. They still are good. Um, you know, plug and charge. It's fantastic. Every car really needs that. It is a slow handshake time, which is interesting, given that it's Rivian hardware on both ends. Um, and I was just flabbergasted seeing on this random weekday in the middle of the day, actually in the morning, um, it was full of Rivians. Like there's 6 stalls. One was broken, which is interesting because they do claim that
Oh,
uptime, which is fine.
yeah.
Maybe of the 100 chargers around that was the one broken one, but that was pretty inconvenient. And then, yeah, I could not believe it was full. I was so confused because Rivian is open to Tesla superchargers. There's lots of Tesla superchargers along this route. I was so confused. But just as we got to know the vehicle and understand how it was operating and prioritizing things, things started to fall into place and make sense to me. Oh, as it turns out, that was one piece that helped me learn that Rivian really does prioritize its own chargers when that's available in the route planning. So that's why all these Rivians were there, because all of them were orchestrated by their vehicle, their truck or SUV, to stop at this charger along the route, which was interesting. And that's a bummer for the owners, actually. I mean, I do get it on one hand. I'm like, you know what? You should, if it's not a if it doesn't harm the owner, I would absolutely say that's great. Send the owner to their charger because Rivian knows their chargers are probably going to work better than
Mhm.
Electrify America. Um, not really better than Tesla's in some ways, but I don't know. It was a bummer. It was exciting, but then I was let down by waiting in line, seeing a charger that was broken, and also finding out that they were load shared. And when you have
Yep.
three Rivians pulling up and all three sharing 300 kilowatts, that means you're not likely to get the quote unquote 200 kilowatt that the Rivian said it would probably get at this, A rated charger.
Mhm.
So that was, yeah, it was just a realization of like, wow, this is really how this is all optimized. And in a perfect world, this makes sense. But in the real world where they are selling a lot of Rivians and people are starting to road trip them, which is awesome. I'm so glad to see that people are not afraid of road tripping EVs now. But, this is not what I would say is an optimal experience. So, if I had known better, if I was to do it again, I would sadly skip the Rivian charger and just hit Tesla Superchargers and Electrify America, which pains me because I like the Rivian chargers themselves. They're fine. The screen works, which I can't really say for EA often. They don't seem to derate based on weird charger behavior. It's just derated because of load sharing. So I would have just skipped it to avoid the crowds, honestly. So that was a bit of a different experience. And then yeah, the realization of them prioritizing their own charger. I don't know the programming, the background. It'd be interesting to talk to the engineers just to understand the algorithm behind it all. But going on this route, we had it try to turn us around at one point, and then just route planning on the way back. So, the way to Vegas was the general race to Vegas, just get there as fast as possible within
Mhm.
speed limit rules and stuff. But
Mhm.
the way back, we had to listen to the vehicle. So, we didn't say we couldn't change certain settings. So I kind of took the liberty to say, which hurt me, but I was like, you know what? I'm going to unselect Rivian from the preferred networks. It's cool that it lets you pick networks. Like you could say if
Right.
you don't like EA, you could be like, don't use EA, only use Tesla and Rivian. And I'm sure in a lot of places that works fine. But I didn't just toggle it off and just let it go. I tried it. I tried to see what the route would do with it toggled on and off. And when it toggled on, it would add 30 to 45 minutes to the trip to take me to this Rivian charger. It would add a fourth charging stop. Without the Rivian charger, we'd be doing 3 stops. And so the route planner literally added a fourth extra stop, not really close to the highway. And that was kind of interesting to me. So I don't know how far off the highway it needs to be for it to ignore it, because obviously it didn't take us like a different state over to see
Mhm.
more chargers. But the way out there was also, I mean, what made me really go down this research rabbit hole was the flabbergasted moment of when it tried to route us a total of 4 hours out of the way to
Oh.
go to a Rivian Waypoint charger, a level 2 charger. Granted, it is 11
Oh.
kilowatts, like an
Yeah.
impressive for level 2, but it was going to
Sure.
take us, I think it was like 40 miles off the highway to a Waypoint charger and sit there and charge for 2.5 hours just to add just enough charge to
What?
get to the next DC fast charger, which we could have
Yeah.
made
Yeah.
anyways, except for the Rivian not allowing us to get to a charging stop below 10%. So just some flawed logic, and it was interesting to learn all of this in real time. It made me feel better to learn what was really happening and not just think like, okay, this is just crazy buggy software. It wasn't
Sure.
buggy. I think this is just how it's actually designed. And in some ways, I don't think this is a bad design. Like in some circumstances, I'm sure this would be completely fine. But clearly, in our circumstances, we found out just how many weird issues this can give. And me and Andreas know what we're doing. And I fear more for the end user. Like that's who I care about. The
Mhm.
average person who may have just bought the Rivian, they're really excited. They take it on a road trip. They heard it has good route. They see it has route planning, and they just follow it. And for people who were just following it, someone literally would have added 4 hours to their trip by just listening to what the truck told them to do.
Yeah.
What's your
And that's
impression?
that yeah. Well, that's what I was about to say is like, we know these things. If I saw that, I would be like, that's a red flag. Let's not do that. And so I'm really curious, and I reached out to Rivian. I don't have an answer yet, but I've definitely, Jordan, once I get a reply back from them, I think I would love to reconvene with you and talk about it. But I asked, I said, listen, I understand that you prioritize your Rivian Adventure Network. It makes sense to do that. I get it. I think there definitely needs to be if and then statements, right, placed into these formulas where it's like, okay, if you have to go so far out of your way, right, out of the highway, let's say, then maybe don't take me there. Rely on using another charger. Like you, I took a trip recently from here from Florida to North Carolina, and I use I went into navigation, selected Tesla and Rivian. Right, I wanted to use Tesla superchargers and Rivian Adventure Networks on the way up there because I knew that they were in on my route, and I wanted to use them. They're overall the user experience when using a Rivian Adventure Network or Tesla supercharger is superior to anything else, typically. And so I did that. And at one point, it wanted to route me to a Rivian Adventure Network that was about 25 minutes off of the highway. By the way, on that exact same exit, there is a Tesla supercharger that I ended up using because I was like, I'm not going to go do that. That's insane. Um, and it worked just fine. Right. And I'm like, I thought it was a fluke, right? I thought, okay, maybe it was and this is before your road trips. I'm like, I didn't think much of it. I'm like, okay, maybe I don't know, just whatever. So I ignored it and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to the Tesla supercharger. But like you said, the average consumer who isn't EV savvy isn't going to sit there and plan their road trip, right? I don't know if you're like me, but I have a better route planner app. I look at all these different things when I'm planning a road trip to make sure that I'm using the best optimal route. And they're not going to do that, right? They're not going to sit there and do that. And if they got told to go to a level 2 Rivian Waypoint charger 45 minutes out of the way and charge for 2.5 hours or whatever it may be, they're going to do that. And guess what? Then they're going to go, why did I buy this? Like, why I could fuel up my gas car and it'll take me, 5 minutes and move on, right? Um, and so that is a flaw in the system. And I have to wonder, I want to say, Jordan, oh, maybe it was a mistake or something, but like you said to me before we started recording, you did some research and you found that other people have had similar experiences. And I had one, clearly not as bad as yours, but I had one. And so it's okay to prioritize the Rivian Adventure Network site, but there definitely needs to be some filters put in place to say, if this is not the best experience for the user, if you're going out of the way, blah blah blah, whatever they may be, right? There needs to be something put into place, because that otherwise is going to give everybody a bad experience, and then they'll never want to road trip with their EV again if they're going 6 hours out of their way to do something.
Right. Yeah. And I was trying to put myself in those shoes. When I first arrived to the Rivian Adventure Network on the way to Vegas, arrived nice and low. I was excited. It was just within range. That was like, it was like 305 miles to get there. We arrived with like 5%. So, the truck initially saying we could do 400 miles. As we know, that's obviously not highway range, but it was pretty wild to see a 25% difference as what we left with versus what we arrived there with. And yeah, plugging in, plug and charge, great. That was like, oh, awesome, this is working. And then seeing 40 kilowatts, that's like my emotions were all over the place. It was really playing with them a bit, because
Yeah.
you see that and you're like, that's terrible. But also, not everyone would necessarily know. I mean, all the truck was saying is that this is an Rivian Adventure Network charger. It's rated A, with the rating system,
Yep.
and a typical speed of 200 kilowatts. And that's just, every time I went to a charger that was rated, it was not usually the A experience that it was advertising, and I never saw the speeds that it was advertising I would reach. It was all it was saying was like, oh, you'll hit max speed here. But I mean, we were in hot conditions, but that's points to another challenge with some of the Rivians is just
Hmm.
thermals can be challenging.
Oh, it's
And
terrible. It's bad.
yeah,
Yeah, it's bad.
and another issue with this that was I actually lend this a bit more to software glitchiness, which could be isolated to my case, but the Rivian itself did not realize that the charger was full. So maybe the logic would have routed us somewhere else. But when we were approaching it, it said 4 spaces available. And when we arrived, there was 0 available. And then I was like, what in the world? So I ended the navigation. And then when I pulled it back up again, it said station full. So it's just like very slow to understand. I mean,
Hmm.
I don't know. There's no way 4 trucks would have plugged in within like the 2 minutes of when I checked versus arriving there.
Right. There
And
should
it was,
be there's a refresh rate there that's not happening or isn't set up properly.
yeah,
Where, like, I feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's been a while, but like I feel like the Tesla route planner in real time tells you if there's superchargers are available, right, or not.
it does. It's that's not great either, though. Like I've definitely
Okay,
seen a lot of um, incorrect that does eventually correct itself. But the difference there is most Tesla superchargers are banks of 8, 12, 16. This
sure,
is 6, which granted is better than going to Electrify America and seeing 4. But
right.
even then, when you combine that with the challenge or issue of every Rivian in the vicinity being routed here, then your chances are it's going to be fuller. And sure, we are in a Rivian heavy area. I mean, if I was in some other parts of the country where Rivians are less popular, but there are Rivian chargers, I'm sure I'd love to own a Rivian there, and I would drive it all over the place and just go to that charger, be the only one there. Heck yeah, full speeds every time. I think they're probably
Yeah.
pretty consistent. Like it seems like good hardware. I've had no issues with their hardware. It's just I take issue with the unfortunate load sharing with when you have such a huge battery, like any sort of derating on a truck that already isn't first in class with charging is rough. I
Hmm.
mean, a battery this big, you should be seeing 200 kilowatts to like 60, 70%. And
Agreed.
it's just not there. Maybe they'll get there. I'm sure they'll get there. It's relatively early days. I do have a lot of patience and grace for that. But this was an interesting trip on a lot of ways, and not in ways I expected it to be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with you there in that a shared, obviously, shared chargers. The vehicle is saying, hey, you're going to get to this Rivian Adventure Network site. You're going to charge at 215 kilowatts, right, whatever it may be, the max, and you only have to be there for 14 minutes, and then you get there and it's full, and you're charging at a max of 40, and it's only that 15 minutes turns into 45 minutes. Like, that's just not a good experience at all. Versus, hey, I'm going to go to this Tesla supercharger. Yeah, I'm going to get there and I'm going to get the limited by charging station because it's hot and the handle got hot, right? Which is a whole nother conversation topic. But at least I know that I'll be able to pull, 150 kilowatts, right, or 160 versus that 40 kilowatts that I was getting at that Rivian Adventure site. Um, is a better experience.
Yeah, and it does feel like there's some disconnects between various things happening. I mean, on one hand, there was a disconnect between the truck and knowing the state of the charger, how many were being used clearly, but
Mm-hmm.
also sometimes it was saying full, and even throughout the charging session, like at times the software would show it like full, and then at times it would show it with spots available. And so I don't, that really seems buggy to me. That doesn't seem like a logic flaw. I mean, the
Yeah.
bug, I guess, could generate itself from that. But another disconnect, I think, is the truck was always preconditioning pretty much the whole drive. I was always
Always.
routing to the
Yep.
next charger. It was always preconditioning to try to get the battery cooler. It never really got it that cool. But then it would tell me that I would have to stop at this charger and charge for 19 minutes, and then 34 minutes later I'm leaving the charger. The truck knows the battery temperature, so therefore I would wish for it to know that we won't see the optimal charging curve. So don't set the expectation for the customer that that's how long they'll sit and charge, because some people
Yeah.
might ignore. I mean, some people might get to the charger, start a timer on their phone, go do stuff, and then get back after the timer, unplug, and keep going, and then find out, oh, I don't have the range to make it. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of, I hate to say like plan for the lowest common denominator, I guess, but like there are people still learning this, how to
Sure.
road trip, how to understand charging, and there's just a few quirks with the software. It doesn't show you battery temperature while you're plugged in,
So
and I know
annoying.
Rivian said it was because they didn't want people to like see high temperatures and freak out, but at the same time, that feels a little
As soon as
dis-
you unplug the vehicle, you're gonna see the high temperature. So like
it,
like that it's kind
with
of a
that.
really moot point.
That's almost worse because we unplugged and then got on the highway, and immediately the battery was orange and the temperature was
Yeah.
orange. It was in
Yeah.
like its warning zone, and it was like, what? Like, so there's just
Yeah.
some things that I just, yeah, I mean, and I get it. I get it. I'm not going to hold them up to this impossible bar of like, look how Tesla's doing it, because Tesla's A, not perfect, but B, has been around a lot longer and has been working on software for a lot longer. And so I'm not expecting everyone else to be at that level, but that is a benchmark. And I've seen Rivian benchmark Tesla, and in many ways, I like things about Rivian software more than Tesla.
Sure.
So this plus those videos were never meant to be a hit piece, but more of just a like, oh,
No.
this is me learning about some of the weaknesses, and it's meant to be constructive criticism, I guess.
Sure.
It's still one of my favorite vehicles, and if I was just gonna go rent a vehicle to go into the mountains, it'd be a Rivian, and
Yeah.
I'd go back and forth on R1S and R1T because I like them both. And as I think initially I was like, why in the world would people buy both? Because people were telling me they wanted both, and I was like, nope, I get
Sure. Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's true. Like I don't see your videos that you guys release at hit pieces. I mean, truth be told, it's the same thing with me, right? My job is to report on Rivian news, positive or negative. Um it's to be critical because I don't want to sit here and sugarcoat everything, right? There are problems. And just to go back for a moment to talk about, there is a huge disconnect, right? The fact that when you get to a charger, you plug in the driver display, like on Tesla, when you've reached the point where you can continue your trip, right? It kind of tells you that, and like it alerts you very prominently. Rivian doesn't have that. There's a disconnect there where like on the driver display, it doesn't give you any of that information, right? You just have to kind of guess, especially if you're someone who uses percentage. And like you mentioned, this is a big gripe across the Rivian community. Please show us arrival and departure percentage on the navigation. Stop using miles. Like that doesn't mean anything to most people, right? Especially because the Rivian navigation, as you probably encountered, is very conservative with its range,
Yeah,
which is, I'm not complaining about that. I'm good with it telling me, hey, you're going to arrive with 20 miles and then surprise, you arrive with 40 miles, right? Even though like whatever, that's fine. I'd rather be conservative than promise and under deliver.
And that even that was an interesting, getting to Vegas, we saw it was telling us we'd arrive with like 6-7 miles remaining, which is 1 to 2%. And then as we got closer and closer, just the discharge curve at the lower half of the battery was not the same as the upper half, I guess. So we ended up having to hypermile it, turn off AC, go 40 miles an hour on the highway
oof, oof,
in
that's rough.
Vegas just to make it there when the truck told us we had buffer. But
Sure.
then on the return trip coming back to Fort Collins, the opposite happened, that we disconnected from the charger right when the Rivian told us to. And then after some elevation changes, it was like, oh, actually, you can't make it. You got to go stop at this Tesla supercharger for like 15 minutes. I was like, you just told me to
Does it
unplug at
not
this
take
time.
into account all of the elevation changes and
And
like
I think it tries, but needs some refinement in that regard,
sure.
because by the time we got down some more elevation, then it removed that stop and said we had a 20-mile buffer, and then we finally pulled into Fort Collins with like 50 miles of
That's
range, like
crazy. Yeah, yeah.
huge, like almost 10. I think it was like maybe 8% by the time we arrived. But going from 1% to you can't make it to then 8% is a pretty big difference. And sure, I would rather be conservative and people not be stranded, but it was weird to see our destinations have such a different experience when we were kind of doing the same thing on both sides.
Sure.
And the big difference was heat. So maybe the heat really, really affected the range, which is interesting because usually it's a cold thing.
Yeah.
But it was nicer when we arrived into Fort Collins and had a bigger buffer, whereas it was really hot getting into Vegas, and maybe the truck's thermals were maybe that was just throwing everything off. The sensors that were used to decide the range, like there's so many things it could be. It'd be interesting to see if Rivian could decipher some things from the logs. I mean, this is a truck they provided us,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. I have so much respect for the company because they don't admit to having things perfected. They listen to the customers. They listen to us in the media who are reporting on these trucks, and they're not hiding them from us either. Like they let us use this, and
Hmm.
even then it was an outgoing model, but only because in theory the new like dual motor max pack situation shouldn't really be much different, like maybe 1 to
It
2%.
shouldn't. No, it doesn't
So
sound like they changed thermals or anything on the batteries. So
yeah, so if any, like I'm glad they provide us vehicles so we can do our testing, and that speaks a lot to them, to me as a company, because they're not trying to sugarcoat things and hide things. They're just like, here it is. And
hmm
because I think they do know it's a great product that's still being refined, and
right.
we're out here to, I mean, we can make praise videos about the product all we want, and we did early on for sure. Those things haven't changed. It's just now we're becoming more and more nerdy and accustomed to what it can, but also what it can't do.
Yeah. Well, and also especially for you guys at Out of Spec, you're reviewing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars. You're seeing what's out there, right? You're seeing the competition, and you're seeing how some other OEMs are doing a better job or a poorer job at implementing certain things. And so that's really what it comes down to. You get to be critical about it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And I'll leave it to this and say that I'm gonna reach out to. I've reached out already to Rivian, and I'm gonna send this recording as well, and hopes to get some kind of clarification and answers on certain things, Jordan. And hopefully, I'll have you back, or I can jump over on the Spec podcast, whatever. We can have more discussions on this because there definitely is some work to be done, and there's definitely disconnects between a lot of the different and like you said, they don't claim to have perfected it. They don't by any means, and they don't claim to they don't claim anything really. They're like, here it is, and every software update, things get a little bit better. So I hope
Mhm.
that a lot, and I think a lot of this outside of battery thermals and all that stuff that's just in chemistry and all that, I think a lot of these things can be resolved with software. Um,
Yeah. You said sometimes things get a little bit better. Sometimes things get a lot of bit better. Rivian is
yep,
aggressive with their software updates. I
they are.
praise them for that because there's a lot of companies that, I mean, notably Toyota with the BZ4X, you can't even software update half of the things, most of the things actually. And
Sure.
so it's just, I Rivian's still a product that I recommend more than most things. Like it's
Yeah.
usually like Tesla or Rivian,
Yeah.
and depending
Yeah.
on what kind of
Same.
vehicle you need. And I
Sure.
cannot wait. And I think I did a podcast with Francie on this on the Outspec podcast, and I was just like, I am saying all of these issues because I want them to fix them because I want the R3X, and basically just what can I do to get them ready for that to be just the best freaking product
Perfect.
ever.
Yeah. 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 And one last thing I forgot to mention, I want to bring it up is and then we'll kind of end it up here. But do you think so I agree with you in that terms that when I'm doing road trips and the battery's preconditioning for like 2 hours and I live in Florida, it's hot, right? Like we're triple digits here and all that. And so it's hot and the battery can never get to its optimal temperature that it wants to be, right? So you would assume that the vehicle would know that and be able to recalculate and say, oh hey, you're gonna have to be here longer because the battery was not able. That's fine. If it was honest with me and all that, it would be great. But do you think that maybe Rivian is not as aggressive with how it runs, like maybe its fans or its thermal limits on, like, could it be more aggressive, you think, to cool the battery down more? Or maybe if I'm at a charger charging, like ramp up the fans as loud as you can. I don't care. Just make it
Yeah.
cooler.
That's what I wonder, and that I have a lot of things I'd love to hear responses from this with you and the podcast I did with Francie. Like, I think it would be great if we all got together,
Yeah.
maybe with an engineer or just responses you hear, and like also update Francie on it because she's
Yeah.
been along for the ride as well.
Sure.
And that's true. I would like to know, is the truck doing all it can, or is there more it can do, but they didn't want people to freak out by the noise. They clearly didn't want people to
Right.
freak out by seeing battery temperature, but on the other side, I think just be transparent with the data. And I would there be, it'd be cool to have a way to like precondition. Like, I know I'm gonna
Yeah.
go road trip, and so kind of
Yeah.
like track mode with a Tesla, it'll pre-chill
Yeah.
everything. Like,
Yeah.
I wish I could maybe even have levels of aggressiveness on the
Sure.
preconditioning. Like, maybe someone's like, you know what, the fans are really annoying, but just let her rip because I want
Yeah.
maximum
Yeah.
charging. And then there's other
Yeah.
people, to their point, a lot of comments on these videos are like, this is not realistic. People don't actually road trip like this. And it's like, that's totally great. We are testing for the kind of edge case. But
Yeah.
you're right, many people would get somewhere. Some people might even like that little offshoot that, Rivian was trying to take me to this level 2 charger that was probably at a pretty cool trailhead in a gorgeous area of
Yeah.
Utah.
Yeah.
And if I wasn't in a rush, and if it wasn't 110 degrees, I would have gone hiking. So that there's plenty of people who aren't in a rush, don't need it to be optimal charging curve, but you know, cater to the nerds a little bit if you can, and make it an option. Make on one hand, I get not overwhelming people with options, but
Yeah.
also, I don't know. It's a delicate balance with UI, UX, and all of that. Like it, I don't know what the correct answer is, but it'd be fun to nerd out with someone from Rivian
Sure.
about that.
Yeah, I think we can do it. I have a pretty good relationship with Wasim, who's the chief software officer at Rivian, and we've been actually talking about doing a show, a podcast or something. And I think I can convince him to come on, and maybe the four of us with Francie as well. We can have a conversation and see what we can get out of him and learn some information, and just kind of have a nerdy discussion because I am like you. I want the nerd data. And they told, like, I've asked them, I'm like, please give me the nerd data. There's people who want it. And they're like, we're working on it. We just have to find a good way to put it and present it there. But like, it's so slow, right? Like, I don't have patience. You have patience. I don't. So it's like, give it to me now. I want it now. Like, let me manually precondition my battery. Let me do all these other things that seem like easy tasks, but in reality, they're not.
Yep.
We always joke around of like, oh, it's just a flip of a switch, just toggle that switch on and we're done. It's like, it's not that easy. But
Right.
um cool. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me. We've got some homework to do. We'll see if we can get some more information about this. Like you said, a lot of people who road trip and day to day their Rivian or any EV probably don't really care about getting the best speeds, the optimal, and all that. But there is a subset of group of users who do. That's you guys. I'm one of those people, when I'm planning a road trip, even for my own stuff, like I just want to be optimal and I want to get places at the best. I want to get peak charging. I want to do that, right? I want my vehicle to be top performing. And,
Right.
but there's other people who don't care, and that's okay. That's completely okay. But for those that do care, this is the type of content for you. And this is the type of information we want to get, because I think at the end of the day, it will just make Rivian better, and I don't think there's a downside, truly.
Right. It makes Rivian better and it makes the end user happier, and that's a win-win in my opinion. So always happy to come nerd out about that, Jose. Maybe we can't solve world peace, but we can start here.
And Jordan, do you want to tell people where to find you after you drink your water?
Yeah. Staying hydrated out here. It's very dry and
Yeah,
hot. But Out of Spec Motoring is where all these videos have been. Of course, the Out of Spec podcast, the Out of Spec Empire, for lack of a better term. Just so much Rivian content, you can't even keep up with it between us and Jose. I mean, you probably are all nerds at this point too. So that's where everything's been. Of course, I'm Jordan Schieffer over on Twitter, X, whatever you call it nowadays, and enjoy connecting with all you guys. And I even had a shirt made for this silly race to Vegas. So
you
go
did.
support Team Rivian and Out of Spec. And the shirts
Yes, yes, absolutely.
shop.outofspecstudios.com. It's below all the videos. So it's
Yep.
fun, all fun and games. This is all fun and games, but also real world learning, and we'll see where it
Hmm.
goes.
Yeah, and I will drop all the links in the description below. Thanks everybody for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notified when I release new content. Make sure you go follow Out of Spec. I occasionally show up on the Out of Spec podcast and talk with friends, see about Rivian stuff. And yeah, follow Jordan on social media and follow Out of Spec and check out the store. And by the way, one last thing, you do all the like video editing for Out of Spec, right?
Quite a bit. The ones, yeah, a decent amount.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I'm sure you're not alone, but I just want to give you props and praise because I think you do a phenomenal job with the editing work and watching these. Everybody jokes around. Oh, Kyle loves to make 3 hour long videos, but somebody has to sit there and and edit all that, and
Yeah.
I'm sure it's not easy. So, like, good job with that and amazing work. And the graphics, like the quality of your videos, have just gotten so much better. So, a huge praise to Kyle, the team, and you because I love you guys out of Spec. You guys are my friends, and I always look forward to doing stuff with you guys. So,
Yeah. Appreciate everything, Jose.
all right, well, guys, take care. I'll see you in the next one.